Kostas Zikakis, a PhD candidate from the University of Heidelberg. We talk about the subject escaping the peak sanctuary rituals, or rituals on a peak sanctuary. So, please, Costa, thank you very much.
So, good morning to everybody. It's my very first time by an international congress, and I'm really enjoying our presentations. And I'm thinking maybe all of you are already familiar with more or less with Peak Sanctuaries. Okay. I have to put this here. Okay.
So, try.
Okay. Yes, it is much better now. So, I suppose that all of you are more or less to an extent familiar with the Peak Sanctuaries. So, if it's so, I can skip the first part so that we spare some time. If not, okay, I can make an introduction. And so, what would you like to do? Okay. So, there is no doubt that as long as it came to possess a religion, the humanity was always spiritually attracted by high places. Most civilizations recognize three kinds of worlds: a material one, where humans and other living beings reside, and two types of spiritual worlds, where the gods, the spirits, and the dead ancestors reside: a celestial world and an underworld deep under the earth's surface. Because of that, the peaks and the caves are of high importance, as they are the closest points to from our world to the spiritual worlds. This is basic human religious thinking, and as a matter of fact, the Minoan Crete was not an exception. But let's see if we can escape the peak. Many peaks on Crete seem to have been of a sacred importance for the Minoans, as it can be presumed for a number of Minoan sanctuaries discovered on peaks, the so-called Minoan Peak Sanctuaries. This type of sites consists of a number of natural terraces and a sacred point at or near somewhere at the top, sometimes framed by building, but most of the times freestanding on the terrain. Sometimes some sites extend to more than one peak, for example, Petsofas or Pyrgos. Peak sanctuary sites vary considerably in size, plan, or even wealth, depending each time on whom they attracted. For example, the site of Yuktas, that served the major centers of Knossos and Archanes, differs considerably from Antipatos Korakias, that serve probably the local villagers. However, in their diversity, they are defined by a set of common rules. Now I'll name only some of the most stable ones, because there is big difficulty to state rules what are for every big sanctuary. So, first, they are located relatively close to the settlement they serve, but they are never part of it. Second, they are visibly aligned with terrestrial or celestial points of great importance, for example, a settlement, other peak sanctuaries, or the rising of the sun over a nearby peak at the equinoxes. And above all, third, they make use of the same assemblage of equipment. And this equipment, most of the times, is human and animal figurines, pottery, and some other artifacts of ritual use, like ladles or horns of concentration, offering or libation tables, and triton cells. The existence of a uniformity of cult on the peak sanctuaries is still debated among the scholars. For example, at the last Archaeological Congress, there were more than 3 articles, I think, about this subject. But still, similar cult objects may indicate the practicing of similar rituals. Interestingly enough, we cannot say the same about the distribution of the peak sanctuaries on the island of Crete. As you can see on the map, we have a huge concentration of sites at the east side of the island, but almost nothing at the west side. And the rest of the sites appear to be grouped into three major clusters of sites, one at the west side of the Dikti mountain, one of the east side of the Ida mountain, and one between Ida and the White Mountains. There are also two sites that seem a little remote, Yuktas and Kofinas, but actually they are not so much remote, so maybe we could put them also together with the other cluster. If we compare this picture with the distribution of the palaces and the other possible administrative centers on the island, we will see that these two patterns do not match perfectly. Many Peak Sanctuaries probably served the local villagers, while on the other side, not every major center is served. So, for example, here, settlements like Gounia or Kydonia or Phaestos, even Malia, seem not to have a Peak Sanctuary at all. Of course, the local landscape plays also its part, as we have large plains on the center of the island, here, and while very big mountains are not easily accessible to encourage a settlement to establish a Peak Sanctuary of them. And in the case of Crete, we have already three major mountains, Dikti, Ida, and worst of all, the White Mountains, where there are vast areas that cannot be inhabited the whole year. So, accessibility is the major factor. That, for example, the distance between Knossos and Yuktas from one side and Malia and Karfi from the other side is almost the same. But in contrast to Yuktas, which, as you can see from the height profile, it is easily accessible. Karfi is not easily accessible. In fact, Karfi is a very remote site. And if you want to access it from the sea, then you have to ascend and descend mountains twice. You can see it here. If you want to go from Malia, for example, to Karfi, you have to ascend the mountain, then descend, then ascend another one, and then ascend again, and then go up to the peak. How can I use it? So, although Karfi seems to be not far away from Malia, it is nevertheless a very remote site, and it is not a coincidence that they later built a refugee settlement over there. But still, these factors do not explain everything. For example, okay, here we cannot see it, so I have to go to this map. For example, Gounia here are close to a very promising site for Peak Sanctuaries, and if they do not want to have it here, maybe they could have it at the east side of Mount Dikti, but nevertheless they do not have. Or Phaestos could have a Peak Sanctuary maybe at one of these ridges, but they do not have it either. Even Malia, who could have a Peak Sanctuary at the mountain here of Selena, they do not have it. They do not have one. So, all of the centers could have their own Peak Sanctuaries, but they don't. And it seems like they choose not to. So, the question is, okay, they don't want to have a Peak Sanctuary. Did they have an alternative? And in order to make an answer, let me begin with a look at the so-called sanctuary return from Zakros. On the so-called sanctuary return of Zakros, we see a fictional Peak Sanctuary on a mountainous terrain. And this depiction was enough detailed so that we can assume a plan of this fictional sanctuary. So we see a yard with an altar and a variety of offering tables or altars, and a building consisting of 3 adjacent rooms, before of them something like a corridor, and maybe before the corridor something like a propylon. We can also suspect from this depiction a possible worship of celestial deity and maybe some rituals. So the four spikes before the room, so this here, 1, 2, 3, 4, are probably there in order to attract lightnings. And Chrysula Kardara has very persuasive argued for this option. The animals on the other side, probably falcons and wild goats, are both mountainous animals which could have been seen as messengers of the pilgrims to a celestial deity. And I'll explain this a little. So here we have a comparison between real falcons and falcons in Minoan art, for example, for the Zakros Riton, and this is a figurine from Euctas. So we see it is quite realistically depicted. So the falcons can fly very high, and that means if they can very high, they can access the deity on the sky, so they could be very good messengers. And maybe the Minoans had imagined a half falcon, half human messengers of the gods. Okay, the Zakros master was always very creative, and he definitely had his own sense of humor, but maybe this time these very well-known seals of him were just his own version of something that already existed in the local folklore. From the other side, the climbing skills of the goats are awe-inspiring to the point that someone would imagine that these animals can fly. For example, a Minoan shepherd who could see a wild goat in a distance of 200 or 300 meters at such a place, probably they could believe that this animal simply flies. And if a goat can fly, of course, it once again, it can access the deity of the skies, and then it can be a very good messenger. And maybe it's not a coincidence that sometimes we have depictions of wild goats dragging a chariot. Maybe they are dragging the chariots of the gods. Okay, everything's fine with all this story, but now we have a problem. We have this depiction of this fictional sanctuary, and we have already detected over 30 Peak Sanctuary sites, but not a single one of them fits this plan on the return. So what's wrong here? Is it a totally functional depiction, or maybe it exists somewhere and we are just looking in the wrong place? So I argue that maybe it is the second case, and in order to explain that, let us have a better look on those sites that chose not to have a Peak Sanctuary. So we will begin from Malia. There was a small sanctuary at the Minoan town of Malia, also known as the Middle Minoan II Sanctuary, because it was functional only during the Middle Minoan II period. It was located on a relatively empty space between the palace and the quarter Mi, over here. Today, I think it is under the museum, so if you go to the site of Malia, there is no on the map the site. And formerly, before it became a sanctuary at the Middle Minoan II, it used to be a house. But so this is the reason there are these walls here, and here you can see it better. But later, it was just a small sanctuary with 3 rooms, one storeroom, one preparation room, and the main sanctuary room, and a small corridor before the 2 of the 3 sanctuaries. And at the south of the sanctuary, there was a lot of empty space, probably a yard or a town square. If we want to compare now this plan with other freestanding sanctuaries, the best parallels are Euctas, which in this form is of a sort, it's of a later date, and the also Middle Minoan II Sanctuary of Anemospilia. Although there are also some other opinions of how it looked like. For example, this one. And now we go to the finds. The objects discovered on the Middle Minoan II sanctuary were more or less very similar to the objects we expect from a Peak Sanctuary. For example, these animal figurines are also typical for Peak Sanctuaries. The ceramic, the pottery, was mostly for cooking and for containing or pouring liquids. And pottery for cooking and for pouring liquids or containing them is also to be found on Peak Sanctuaries. Now I'm not comparing similar ceramic or similar data, it's just comparing the use of the ceramic. Other objects offering tables, which perhaps have also parallels at some Peak Sanctuaries of East Crete. And we have also triton cells, and these, as is also mentioned, can be found also in Peak Sanctuaries. And now let's go to Phaestos. Wait a minute. I forgot that. So, at the center of the main sanctuary, we have this libation table, and that means, no, it's not a table, it's a plate, a libation plate, and that means that libation rituals were practiced inside the table. We don't know if we had also libation rituals on the yard, because there is no information about that, but let's keep it in mind. So, now let's go to Phaestos. In Phaestos, So, in Phaestos, there was a sanctuary during the Middle Minoan II on the edge of the old palace. This is a reconstruction of the old palace, and our sanctuary is over there. It is these rooms here, some rooms behind them, and this the room behind this door. And then we have a very narrow corridor, and it follows the shape of the building, and it goes to this place where we have also a small yard, and that belonged also to this sanctuary. And here is a plan, so you can see it better. And this is the old palace building. This is the new palace building, and because of the new palace building, we cannot be sure what happened in this part. So we cannot be sure if this sanctuary was communicating actually with the palace. So we can only say that it was accessible from the court outside. And now you see here the entrance of the old palace that goes through this way and then here. So someone that had to go to the palace, then it is actually the very first part of the palace you could encounter, and that means that if you do not want to visit the palace but only the sanctuary, you could avoid the palace. And this is another indication that this sanctuary was probably most intended for public use. There are two major phases. So at the final phase, it was the main sanctuary with 3 preparation rooms and 2 storerooms, and of course the yard. But at the initial phase, it was only these 2 rooms, probably this one too, so probably 3 rooms and the yard. We do not have any indications that there was here somewhere a corridor. We have only this corridor that leads to the yard. But once again, we have libation plates, one in the middle of the main sanctuary and one in the main yard. And concerning the finds, once again, we have pottery for cooking or containing and pouring liquids. We have already said it, that same uses has also pottery in Peak Sanctuaries. And we have other objects who have parallels from Peak Sanctuaries. For example, these stone bowls, who have parallels from Euctas, libation tables, which have good parallels from Euctas and maybe a less good parallel from Agios Georgios. And also Triton cells, but there was not a depiction of them, so I can't show them. And now, finally, let's go to Galatas. The site of Galatas had, during the Middle Minoan III, a dominating position in Seleucid Crete, and even a palace was built here. At the Palace of Galatas, we find again in sanctuaries somewhat similar to the slightly older sanctuaries from Mallia and Phaestos we have already mentioned. Once again, this sanctuary is now here. It does not look exactly like the other two. We have again 3 rooms. This is the main sanctuary room, this is the preparation room, and that was probably the storeroom. And once again, there is here a courtyard, and we have once again the indication of libations ritual in this yard. But not in the sanctuary. In the sanctuary, we have a very big bench, or this is what the Minotakis thinks. But not an libation plate, so there are no indications for libations inside the sanctuary. From finds, there are no depictions, but Minotakis said that the ceramic is similar with the sanctuaries of Mallia and Phaestos, and he made also a comparison. Huh? Ah, okay. So, let's go now, after all this information, let's go to some conclusions. First, in Mallia, Phaestos, and Galatas, we have sanctuaries within the settlement where libation ritual took place in the main sanctuary room and on the yard outside. And we know that the libation rituals also took place on the Peak Sanctuaries, with most prominent examples, the evidence from Euctas and Tsipadas Korakias. So we also know that for the practicing of these rituals, the same equipment has been used on both types of sanctuaries. And it seems that there is some kind of outdoor libation ritual, probably important enough to require a whole sanctuary in order to be accomplished. And if they did not want to practice it on the peak, then they could alternatively to do it on an open yard. So, and sites like Mallia, Phaestos, and Galatas had a substitute for Peak Sanctuary probably, and maybe later depictions like this on the Zakros Riton, or then even later Agia Triava sarcophagus, were maybe just distant memories of rituals in the older type of sanctuary that did not exist anymore. And it is interesting enough that in Agia Triava sarcophagus we have also some pikes and birds, like the Riton of Zakros. And here comes another question. If you cannot escape the peak, if you can escape the peak, if the location does not really matter for the practicing of a ritual, and if the ritual equipment is all over the same, then why do we need the Peak Sanctuary? So why did they want to go out there if they could practice the same rituals literally from their own yard? Maybe there are some other reasons that Peak Sanctuaries could be useful. And there is a theory for Nowitzki that it was just a political game, the whole thing, that it was a way of Knossos to expand their dominance and their influence all over the island, because Knossos possesses the oldest of all Peak Sanctuaries, Euctas. And as a reaction to this, the other major players, Mallia, Phaestos, etc., were resisting this effort. So they did not want to have Peak Sanctuaries at all. And this is a fascinating theory, but it can never be proved. But Peak Sanctuaries were also useful in other ways. In comparison of equipment with other types of sanctuaries shows that only on Peak Sanctuaries we have such huge concentration of figurines. And some groups of figurines are almost unique for these sites, and they have a very special story to tell. They probably represent special groups of young men, for example boxers, or practitioners of a Minoan bullfighting ritual. These groups of young men are possibly connected to initiation rituals, and maybe at least in Eastern Crete there were also female social groups of the same kind of purpose, but we cannot be sure. Also, almost unique to the Peak Sanctuaries are the so-called votive limbs, who are mainly interpreted as offerings of people who seek help for a medical problem or healing for some kind of disease. So, to sum up, could they escape the peak? It is possibly that, like in our own culture, the same kind of rituals could be practiced almost everywhere, but there was also some reasons that could make the location of a sanctuary also very important. A peak could offer a remote sacred location for initiated rituals, or a mountain deity could release some health problems produced from living or near the mountains. But most important, it is a matter of communication. For example, if I want to call somebody but I do not have a phone or a computer or something, I do not simply open my window and call him. I have to go to his house and ring the bell, or maybe call him from outside and hope that I am loud enough so that he can hear me or that he will respond to my call. And I think with Minoans it was the same. If they wanted for ask for more rain, for example, no matter how many libation rituals they could do, in order to better access and communicate with a celestial deity, they had to come closer, so they had to ascend the mountain. And if that's not enough, after all, their human nature was always subject to the imposing effect of the mountain peak. So, thank you very much.
So, Costa, thank you very much for this presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Philip?
No, it's my idea.
Actually, I think it's a wonderful idea. I never thought about it, but there's a picture on it. You didn't show it, but there's a picture on a sealstone. It's from CMS 5, number is I think 201, with the Master of Animals on his left side, on his right side, but on the left side of the ceiling there is a goat with wings, and on the right side there is a Minoan Genius with making some kind of libation, and he's standing in consecrated horns. So, and you see that it's also everything in this iconography is connected to the Peak Sanctuary iconography, as you have perfectly shown in your examples. So I think this is a great idea, and this solution actually shows that they are perceived as flying creatures, as they actually are represented with wings sometimes.
Yes, and there are also some representations of a Minoan deity who is probably speaking with a goat or feeding the goat, and etc. And maybe it is the same. It is this communication of the animal with the deity, and the animal says something maybe that the believer or the pilgrim wanted to tell the deity.
Any other question? Yes, please.
Just one comment regarding the identification of the birds on the Sakros right one. Personally, I don't think that they are falcons, because what is lacking here is the whole beak, and this is really the characteristic of bird of prey. So we would expect them to
Yes. I was always thinking between doves and falcons.
Yeah, but what I think they are.
Yes, but the problem is that what has a dove to do on a mountain peak?
I don't think they are dogs.
Yes.
I think they are some kind of corvids.
Yes, yes, that can be also true, but
Ravens and crows, and this would really fit the beak shape, because the beak is quite strong and powerful, and it's
Yes.
straight, so this would fit much better, I think.
yes, that can also fit much better. And a reason I said falcons is also because of the figurines on Yukta. I believe it is a falcon because of this very distinctive art on flying, and it is very distinctive for a falcon because it descends to catch its prey. And yes, I do not disagree. It can be crows too. It's only this. I'm trying to place them to a mountainous terrain, and I think in the mountainous terrain, birds of prey are much more dominant than a crow. A crow would like to go somewhere not so high to find his food or something like that.
There are some kinds of corvids based on the chops, and they are limited to mountainous areas.
Okay.
Also on creeks, so this would actually fit.
Okay, so I do not have nothing against it. I can accept it. It can be also a crow, yes. Yes, yes. It's okay.
Γιώργο?
We talked about that identified pottery materials and pottery material in big sanctuaries, and mainly you have utilitarian vessels. Utilitarian vessels is the most common thing that you have either in a household or in a big sanctuary, probably, because people, when they are moving up there,
Yes.
to do something, they are staying there at some point, so they have to carry some of the material that they need. It's not like an offering, it's more about use in the place or not. In Simidiam, let's say, in the middle of central Paris, let's say, they have found a lot of utilitarian vessels in Ottomans, even with, but this is what they bring with them. I don't think that it has to do only with the function of big sanctuary at that point.
Yes, it's you are right, and it's not ritual pottery. It is pottery of simple people, but still it is very comparable. And I had this problem too. I was reading about these pottery comparisons on Peak Sanctuaries, and then I thought, yes, okay, we have this type of vessels, but what other types of vessels you can have? So most of the times it can be something like that, something to eat something, or something to bring some water or something else with you. And if you want to ritually pour it, to pour it. So yes, it is only that we have the same pottery in these sanctuaries, and the same pottery, not the same, but of the same use in the big sanctuaries, and that was the comparison.
You should see that basically miniature, comparison of miniatures. So if you have this kind of correlation, so specific
Yes.
types that are written of areas, and something is, and second one is like the dating of big sanctuaries. This is one of the biggest problematics. It starts, some of them start earlier, some of them appear later. So what do you think about this kind of idea? Why some of them are earlier, some of them are later, especially in Steve and in Gurnia? I think that Vance thinks that Stavromenos is a big between Mokros and Gurnia, and he thinks that, and he has traveled up there and has found material that may correlate a Euclid sanctuary between these two sites, let's say, that they refer to this.
Yes.
Perhaps you can see it as a difference. But when do you think, and what does that mean about the political landscape, about religious beliefs?
Yes, the most spectacular difference is after the Middle Minoan II. Then suddenly, from more than 30 sites, you have only 12. And the most spectacular of all is in East Crete, where you have almost half of the sites, and then suddenly you have only 3. And this is mostly interpreted that at this period the palaces start to take a firm grip of this kind of sanctuary, and then you do not need to have so many, because every palace is satisfied with 1 or 2. But before that, every settlement maybe needed a sanctuary, so we have so many, and most of them have not to do with a major settlement, maybe have to do with the local villages and things like that. Now for Stavromenos, I did not know this information. That was very kind of you to tell me. And I don't know yet what happens with it. So what is the comparison about the site? What is the finds, and what exists here? Yes, yes. Yes, but yes. But for me, this is very valuable information, so I appreciate every information about new sites.
We're really out of time. I just want to make
Yes,
a really short comment to what Giorgos said about using cooking vessels or vessels of everyday usage on Peak Sanctuary. I think also, so in my mind, I think that nobody would go on a Peak Sanctuary only to eat. I think that they must have been somehow connected with a ritual or something like that. So even if they were staying there for a day or 2 days and eating, this should have been somehow connected with a ritual, if we accept that Peak Sanctuaries were a sacred place.
Yes, but I think it's one thing to go there to perform a ritual, and then you have to stay overnight. and then you have to feed yourself, you have to eat something.
Yes, but I mean, it's a part of a ritual. Even if you have to feed yourself, it becomes a part of the ritual.
Yes, but it's not the ritual itself. People used to go, for example, in Crete in the 50s and 60s. People used to go for a panegyric, for a local feast of a saint, to a church lying somewhere else, and they would stay for a couple or 3 days. My family did that, and I can assure you that the stuff they took with them, it was to feed themselves, not to perform a ritual. The performing of the ritual was another thing. They had them to sustain themselves. So there's a point there that some of them, they have been just for the people that went there, they stayed overnight, and they had to eat and drink. It is, of course, possible that some of them were used both for eating and drinking and for some ritual consumption at the same time. One does not exclude the other necessarily, but we should encounter that some of them may have a purely practical aspect, without excluding the ritual, of course. But there's a point there. People did that. We have photographic references for this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Costa.